I've got the pleasure of introducing Rebecca Casey. Rebecca is an environmental analyst in the wastewater department of the city of Spokane. Her background is in analytical chemistry and regulatory compliance for pharmaceutical manufacturing and environmental health and safety in pharmaceutical research laboratories. And I'm going to go ahead and let Rebecca kick it off. One reminder, please silence your cell phone if you've got it on. And thank you, and it's all yours, Rebecca.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I'm Becky Casey from the city of Spokane. We're going to talk about our experience with decentralizing private stormwater facility inspection responsibility. We're going to first take a quick dive into the regulatory requirements that necessitated this. We'll go through our program rollout in Spokane, talk about some difficulties that we encountered and some next steps for moving forwards. Starting with those regulatory requirements, in Spokane, we're governed by the Eastern Washington Phase 2 Municipal Stormwater Permit. There are a couple of relevant sections for private stormwater facility inspections. I'm not going to read all that. In short, private stormwater facilities, they need to be inspected by qualified personnel, city staff, every 5 years, or in lieu of requiring site access in perpetuity to these developments, they can also be inspected by qualified third parties annually. Now, many of you saw a poll come through your email inboxes earlier this month, and I've got to thank Lori for distributing that on my behalf. I got responses from 42 different jurisdictions, and I graphed them here. Now, as far as how these inspections are performed, 83% of permittees who responded reported managing these inspections internally with their municipal staff. 12% of them managed those inspections via a third party, and 5% of them reported that they did not inspect private stormwater facilities. Poll results varied significantly by permit type, with Western Washington Phase 1 and 2 permittees being significantly more likely to manage those inspections in-house. But of those 12% of permittees who managed them via third parties, 17% of them hired the third party directly as the municipality, while 83% of them relied on or mandated that the property owners secure their own third party inspections. So this is just our background. Moving into how we actually rolled this out in Spokane, we've got a timeline. In late August of 2019, that's when the city of Spokane really became aware of the permit requirements to inspect these private stormwater facilities. This story actually dates back to the fall of 2018. We got a request for information about our private stormwater facility inspection program from outside NGO. Our director at the time told them that we did have a permit compliant private stormwater facility inspection program. He thought this was true. It turned out not to be true. We did have a compliant public stormwater facility inspection program. We didn't have a private one. Now, that outside NGO that reached out to us, they were contacting us on behalf of a local neighborhood whose residents were really unhappy with some frogs that had taken over a stormwater pond near them. And those frogs made it into the Spokesman Review. This is a photo from the Spokesman Review article. They made it all the way to the Seattle Times. So in August of 2019, we were contacted by that same NGO again, and they notified us of the private stormwater facility inspection requirements in our permit. Now, we interpreted the 2019 Eastern Washington Phase 2 permit to provide a compliance date of the end of 2022 for implementation of this program. Now, unfortunately for that neighborhood and its residents, frogs don't impede the function of stormwater facilities. Also, maintenance of private stormwater facilities is not the city's responsibility. That's the responsibility of the property owners. So even if we had an inspection program, we probably wouldn't have said anything about the frogs. And if we did say anything about the frogs, we certainly weren't going to get rid of them. So there wasn't really a happy ending for this neighborhood, but we did we did have to start our program. In our 2020 annual report, we reported that we didn't inspect any private stormwater facilities in the year before. And we thought that we still had 2 more years to implement this program. But with an ecology desk audit in September of 2020, this resulted in a notice of non-compliance with respect to our lack of a private stormwater facility inspection program. Turns out we had misunderstood the compliance date, that it was actually back in February of 2011, as stated in the original 2007 permit. The 2019 permit did not supersede this. So we started from scratch. Step 1, we had to manually review project files to develop a master list of private facilities which were eligible to be in our program. Now, these records we were searching through, they weren't searchable by the eligibility criteria of our program. So we actually had to hire a temp to review physical records of large developments to determine program eligibility. We had our municipal stormwater inspectors sifting through our online record system looking for additional eligible properties. And due to some difficulties we had in locating records, we added all of Spokane's HOAs to our list. In addition to our master list, we also had to create some kind of process for adding new private facilities to the list as developments became approved. And we had to assess the program needs associated with these additional inspection requirements. Doing these inspections in-house was likely to require an additional FTE, if not multiple. And we also had to think about the practicability of requiring site access in perpetuity. Now, the Spokane has a rather well-earned reputation as a land of cowboys. And the cowboys notoriously do not much care for the government traipsing around on their land and telling them what to do with their stuff. So requiring site access to all of these sites as the city government was likely to pose a significant challenge for us. And it didn't really align with the interests and priorities of our constituents. And so this is where we had to think about that. Moving along, in October of 2020, we submitted a D20 noncompliance notification, and we explained our plan and provided some expected completion deadlines. We thought that we would have our master list assembled by the second quarter of 2021 so that we could begin inspections by the fourth quarter of 2021. At this point, we needed to work on developing an ordinance and actually launching the program. So we drafted an ordinance mandating annual third-party certifications of private stormwater facilities in Spokane. Our Spokane stormwater codes are located in the chapter for United Development or Unified Development Code, and that's governed by our planning department. So we had to pass our ordinance through the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is a board of community members in Spokane, and the city does have a board member, but most of the board members are not affiliated with the city. This is a community board. And once we got through our Planning Commission, we would be eligible to take this to City Council. A lot happened in the next couple of months between September and December of 2021. So we're going to zoom in on this timeline here. In mid-August, we launched a private stormwater facility annual inspection program webpage, so that then in early September, we posted on our city blog about upcoming legislation, and people would have a website to go to if they had a question. We completed our SEPA review, which resulted in a determination of non-significance for our proposed ordinance. And on September 8th, 2021, we initiated our legislative process, publishing a legal ad in the newspaper announcing the start of our first public comment period on the ordinance ahead of our Planning Commission review. Next was our Planning Commission workshop on the proposed ordinance, and then we published another legal ad in the newspaper announcing another public comment period ahead of a Planning Commission hearing. Now, at that Planning Commission hearing, they recommended adoption of our proposed ordinance, and we moved forward towards City Council. Also in September, we submitted a G20 follow-up letter to update ecology on our progress. We were running behind at this point on our initially theorized timeline, but we had assembled a master list of facilities. We had created a record retention process to capture future applicable projects. We drafted our ordinance, we'd entered multiple public comment periods, and we had started our legislative process. So we let ecology know. Our next step was to brief the Public Infrastructure, Environment, and Sustainability, or PIES Committee of our City Council on the proposed ordinance. In early October, we published another legal ad for another public comment period in advance of council action. This is where we notified the public of upcoming council meetings and our proposed legislative changes. We met with City Council at an advanced agenda briefing to discuss our ordinance, and we published another legal ad in the newspaper as we move towards City Council action. So City Council had a first reading of our proposed ordinance, and in late October, we had our City Council final hearing where they approved our ordinance. And ecology actually came to this final hearing and testified in support of our ordinance. On December 2nd, 2021, our ordinance became effective. So zooming back out to our big timeline, between September 8th and October 5th of 2021, we had 4 public comment periods. We had 2 planning commission meetings, and we had 4 city council meetings, which ultimately led our ordinance to become effective in December. These public comment periods are really important to our permit compliance. They allow the public to be involved in the decision-making process with regards to stormwater policy. And during these public comment periods, our constituents were nervous. They wanted to know how we would make sure that this program was implemented fairly and that the proposed ordinance would be applied to all applicable projects. And the city had to acknowledge that there might be gaps here, and we encouraged our constituents to notify us if they had concerns of any specific omissions. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about these gaps in a few slides. This is ultimately where we landed with our ordinance. I put it up here because we're very proud of it, but I'm not going to read it to you because it's long. Private stormwater facilities managing post-construction stormwater for developments which were approved in or after 2011 and which disturbed at least 1 acre of land had to be certified annually by a qualified third-party stormwater professional. The Eastern Washington Phase 2 Municipal Stormwater Permit defines qualified third party as someone who has professional training in the aspects of stormwater management for which they are responsible, but are hired by private entities and not under the functional control of the permittee. So we chose to label them as qualified third-party stormwater professionals to capture the essence of this ecology definition. Affected properties were notified in triplicate. They were notified once about the proposed ordinance before it had passed. This was in addition to the multiple public comment periods that were inherent to our legislative process. They were notified about the ordinance after it passed, and in April of 22, we notified them that it was time to certify their facilities. We sent them letters mailed to eligible properties notifying them of their duty to certify. In the envelopes, we also included an insert with an explanation of the certification requirements and an FAQ and a list of vendors. We wanted to make this process as easy as possible for our constituents. We requested some information from the city of Medina to help us assemble a vendor list, and they let us know who they use for stormwater inspections. We also contacted some local stormwater consultants and engineers in the Spokane area. And this vendor list is not meant to be exhaustive, nor does it represent any kind of city sponsorship of any of these vendors. But it was important to us that we offer our constituents some place to start as they try to comply with this new ordinance. We also included these inspection forms. They have, did you give me a 5 minute?
I did.
Oh, wow.
And that's leaving 10 minutes for questions. Yeah.
Oh, okay. These inspection forms included the eligibility criteria, some instructions for completion and submittal of the form, Site information, inspector information, a site description, and then a number of BMP checklists. These checklists divide BMPs into categories, and they feature notes for common inspection deficiencies noted by our internal inspectors as they're inspecting public facilities. And then at the end, we have a certification statement. Now, this puts inspectors on the honor system, and it doesn't list any penalties for perjury. Now, falsifying these certified inspection forms is still an enforceable violation under our codes. But this form, including that certification statement, was deliberately designed to reduce strain on our third-party inspectors and yield consistent results across multiple vendors. We wanted to simplify it here. We also have our city webpage. This is designed as a publicly accessible tool to clarify our expectations with this program. Now, some constituent surveys revealed significant knowledge gaps in the stormwater arena. As an unrelated PE&O effort in March of 2020, we sent over 70,000 mailers to our residents, offering each one of them a $5 utility credit if they completed an online quiz. Those quiz questions were about where stormwater comes from, where it goes, the function of BMPs, their maintenance responsibilities. We got about 1,500 responses, and we learned that our citizens weren't aware of stormwater BMPs or their maintenance requirements. So this information was prioritized to the top of our webpage. We also included certification requirements, some information about the certification process, listed those FAQs, and uploaded a copy of our vendor list. At the end of our first year, 2022, of the 218 properties that we contacted, 64 of them responded with certifications, marking a 29% response. We didn't issue any notices of violation, NOVs, for the 2022 inspection year because we wanted to give ourselves and our constituents a chance to get their bearings with this program before we started threatening enforcement. And then we moved into our second year. In our second year, we started using the Acela Civic platform to manage our private stormwater facility annual certification program. This is an online resource. Before that, we were using Excel spreadsheets to keep track of all of this information. And this online resource allowed us to do online records storage and also allow online form submittal for our third-party inspectors. In our second year, of the 270 properties that we contacted, we got 91 certifications back. That's a 34% response, which is 5% more than last year, despite increasing the number of properties in the program by 24%. We knew we planned to review project records for program eligibility in the coming year. So we didn't send NOVs to any properties that we thought might get removed if site eligibility were examined more closely. Ultimately, we sent 97 NOVs, and they notified property owners of their failure to certify in 2023, their duty to certify in 2024, and we promised not to issue any penalties associated with the 2023 violation to any property that did submit a 2024 certification. Now, failing to submit a certification in the coming year was to result in city inspection, city maintenance as necessary, a bill to the property for all costs incurred, as well as a possible civil infraction fine. We moved into year 3 and we ran a review of the program. So after running the program for a couple of years, we eliminated some gaps. And we also expanded our resources. We got a couple of new stormwater inspectors, and we also got a brand new FTE position for an environmental analyst in stormwater. Hi, that's me. Our master property list contained some properties which did not meet eligibility criteria. When this master list was initially assembled, the inspectors who worked on it misunderstood the eligibility criteria by just a little bit. They added all sites which were greater than 1 acre in parcel size, developed in or after 2011. Many of these development projects failed to actually disturb over 1 acre of land. So we went through and we removed all of those properties from our list. We also added a button to our online records software so that as inspectors are approving developments for certificates of occupancy, they can flag that development as eligible to our program. And then at the end of the year, we can go collect all of the records that were flagged and add them in so that inspections will begin in the years after. And we also started responding to inspection deficiencies that were noted on those certification forms we received. At the end of our third year, out of the 272 properties we contacted, we got 118 certifications. So this is a 43% response, 9% up from last year. So we're consistently trending up in our response. NOVs were only issued to properties which retained their eligibility through our program review. So of the 153 properties that did not respond to us, 81 of those were removed from the program. So we only issued 72 notices of violation. Now, of those 72 properties, 37 of them also received NOVs in the year before. So we had to draft 2 different NOV letters. The first was for properties on their first consecutive violation for failure to submit a certification. And this was kind of a reworked, softer NOV like we had issued the year before, which notified the property owners of their failure to certify, their duty to certify next year, promising not to come after them as long as they did certify next year. But this time, our kind of threat of penalty was a little bit different. We threatened them with civil infraction fines up to $7,830. And I'll discuss that here in just a second. Properties on their second consecutive violation got more strict of an NOV. We reminded them of the NOV they got last year. We stated that the city's going to proceed with civil infraction fines if a 2025 certification is not received within 30 days. We wanted to give them one last chance at voluntary compliance before we started pursuing a fine. It's a lot easier for us, and we'd much rather they just submit the certification than actually go through the process of trying to find these properties. After those 30 days, they will be fined Class 1 civil infraction fees of $261 per day per the Spokane Municipal Code for those 30 days. That's where that $7,830 comes from. And they'll still be required to pay for and submit a 2025 certification to avoid future fines in 2026. And now we're at today. We have had some successes. We've achieved greater compliance with our permit requirements. The permit language in Eastern Washington doesn't advise permittees on how to handle properties which decline to certify or which deny inspector entry. Western Washington Phase 1 and 2 permits, they don't actually require inspection of 100% of these properties. They allow properties which deny inspector entry also to count towards the goal of their annual goal for inspected sites. Eastern Washington doesn't have any of that language. So if you're not getting all of them, it's hard to say that you're fully compliant. Now, by deferring the cost of private facility certifications to private property owners, we're protecting ratepayers citywide from costs that would otherwise be associated with an FTE or a consultant. And these annual certifications, in order to pass them, they require proper maintenance of privately owned stormwater BMPs. So this helps us to protect water quality and also builds a more protective culture as our community becomes more educated on these BMPs and their maintenance requirements. Now, we've also encountered some difficulties. I mentioned that searching through our historical records was difficult because they're not flagged in ways that make them searchable by the eligibility criteria of our program. So determining which sites are eligible for program enrollment has been fairly consistently difficult. Our enforcement powers are also slightly limited and not very clear. Stormwater violations are penalized as civil infractions. I keep using that term. These are defined in a completely separate municipal code. Fees associated with those civil infractions are defined in another third completely separate municipal code. And they're also, they're listed at $261 per day. So it's not intuitive how these are going to be applied to something like failure to submit an annual certification. We've chosen to assess these fines on a 30-day basis after the NOVs are issued, but if you're a property owner and you look at our codes trying to figure out what the consequences are for failing to certify, that's not necessarily going to be clear to you. A series of missed certifications may also incur a city inspection, which may then incur city maintenance. And that's going to result in charges on the property. Charges left unpaid might incur a property lien. And that process isn't very clearly defined in our codes either. So it's just hard for our constituents to understand what's going to happen if they say no. Now, notices were sent to property owners using contact information that we got from our local tax assessor's office. The Spokane Municipal Code puts certification responsibility on the property owner, not the occupant or the tenant. So we don't mail these notices to the site. We mail it to the property owner. Out-of-date tax assessor records can make it really difficult to reach property owners. And it's impossible for us to really tell if a property owner is failing to certify because we haven't effectively reached them or because they're choosing to ignore the notices. In 2024, 6% of our certification mailers were returned to us as non-deliverable. And we used publicly available business records to try to update the contact information for these properties to the best of our ability. We Googled it. But this is going to continue to be a recurring challenge. Moving forward, we have a number of changes currently in progress, actually. The city is switching to Llama for records retention software citywide. It has some cost benefits, but it's also a more modern software with a more intuitive user interface. It's going to give a better experience to our inspectors as they're trying to upload these forms. It's also more robust, and it's going to streamline a lot of processes that were pretty tedious with the old software. In preparation for this change, we tightened up our master list, performing an in-depth review of HOA eligibility, and we moved into 2025 with 228 eligible properties. We want to develop some maintenance procedures. Currently, the form specifies that when maintenance needs are identified by a certifying inspector, that maintenance needs to be performed within 90 days. But we don't have specific response protocols for what we should do when that necessary maintenance is not performed. So we want to develop some sort of consistent response protocols for commonly noted deficiencies. We also want to revise our city codes in quite a few ways. We want to overhaul them to rewrite the ordinances to more closely mirror the permit language, separating it into construction and post-construction sections, allowing it to kind of function as a standalone utility, which stormwater is not in Spokane. Currently, all stormwater code changes have to go through the planning department because of the chapter in which they are located. And this makes sense for construction codes, but it doesn't make a lot of organizational sense for post-construction codes. So we'd like to separate that out. Now, as I mentioned, the inspection form says you have 90 days to do any required maintenance, but this isn't backed by our code. So we need to get that put in there. And then our penalties. Rather than enforcing stormwater codes using the civil infraction system, we'd like to codify a penalty structure for common violations, using that civil infraction system as kind of a catch-all backup if something new happens. Now, currently, violations of any section of stormwater code are punishable via that civil infraction system, and that makes it difficult for citizens to identify exactly what those penalties are going to look like. And it also means that there's only actually one penalty for any violation of the stormwater code. So failure to submit an annual certification for your private stormwater facilities goes to the same penalty as illicit discharge. And that's not clear, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. So we'd like to revise that as well. And that is a wrap.